We'll talk a little bit more about the shot spotter later, but Jack is a sports writer and has his own column. Where do you blog, Jack?
Yeah, so for right now, I'm actually, that group that I was in is actually no longer, they've kind of moved on to do different.
Oh, that was a pretty good product.
Yeah, so I'm actually in still. I've actually been, even this week, I'm going to look into more, trying to find some online sites, whether it's for different sports teams. So I will definitely, once I have that information, I can share that to you. But one thing me and my father do is we have kind of a podcast on the side. It's called The Player and the Principal, because he's a school principal. So we kind of do that for fun on the side. So that's kind of what I do for right now to kind of like maintain my skills and stuff. So no writing for right now, but that's kind of the one thing I'm kind of doing with my dad for fun.
Jack, of course, the city of Brockton saddened and shocked with the loss of Marvin Hagler, 66 years old. I mean, this guy was invincible, seemingly invincible physically, not that long ago. And sadly, he passed away up in New Hampshire this weekend.
Yeah, very unfortunate. He was someone who was just always a gentleman inside and outside of the ring, and just, one of those guys that I think really embodied obviously you were someone who was around, especially in the city during that time. I think he was just someone who really embodied really what the whole city was about.
Yeah, anytime you saw him, he was personable and friendly, smiling, very, very confident, and just appreciative of the way the city embraced him. He's been in some of the more important fights in the last century. Named the fighter of the 80s, which is really a great, of all the things, that's really something else when you consider the list that the 80s fighters contained.
Oh, yeah, the golden era of boxing, a lot of people would consider, especially for the welterweight, middleweight area.
Exactly what I was going to say. In lightweight, although lightweight's had a number of great eras, there was some terrific fighters in all three. So
that's especially those four kings, and obviously, and just one thing too is you don't see many guys with a Hagler who fought Thomas Hearns, he fought Ray Leonard, he fought Roberto Duran. You don't see guys like that taking all these opportunities. Just those guys, never mind some of the other tough chances he had too.
Even at the risk of losing, millions and millions of dollars in fans, and boxing has taken a back seat over the last 20 years because of the way the champions handpick their fighters instead of going with the. Why do we even have a rating system? I mean, the number one contender deserves a shot at the title in my mind.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's why I'm still someone who's really big into boxing, but that is why the UFC especially has been something that has come up so much, just because they have that one champion per weight division, which is actually what Marvin Hagler's one wish, I know. He said before unfortunately he said this a little bit ago, but before he passed away, he wanted to see boxing eventually get back to one champion per weight class, or even two, and just kind of more have a true champion.
Yeah, unify the belts. Of course, a lot of the corporations, I guess, that own these belts, they don't want to risk losing them to a fighter that they don't necessarily control. I get all that, but it's really not very organic to have these carefully managed fighters who, this guy's not a good fight for you, let's avoid it. And something that even when Hagler was fighting, that could take place on a regular basis, but not for Marvin. He took on anybody that was the toughest opponent at the time.
Yeah, but he was someone who, and unfortunately for him, is he was someone who was, like you said, took all the opportunities, because he was someone who also didn't have many opportunities. Obviously, the Petronellis were kind of, they ended up becoming, obviously, those three, the two Petronellis and Hagler ended up becoming greats, but they were well known for a long time in the whole boxing world, and obviously Hagler had to go to Philadelphia to fight multiple tough guys in Philadelphia. Before he was a champion, had 50 fights before he even got a shot for the belt the first time. So just all the stuff he went through as well before he even got to that point.
And that's terrible to think. He had 50 fights, one loss, and he had no title fights. And so he didn't become a hypocrite. He did not dodge anybody. He took on whoever was deemed the toughest opponent at the time. And I think that really is why Marvin trained as hard as he did. He did not want this to be taken from him. He knew how hard he worked for it. When you think of all the rounds he had to fight before he got a title fight, and all the successful rounds. I mean, the one time he was scored with the knockdown was actually a slip. I used to laugh when I heard the commentators say, "Oh, and that shot hurt Hagler." I know it didn't hurt him. I've never seen Marvin Hagler in trouble in the ring. I can't say that about any other fighter.
Yeah, but it's an interesting thing because I remember Joe Rogan has actually said it before that when you looked at, like, there's a study done on the skull of Hagler, and they said the bones on the side of his head were so big he was almost built in with like actual headgear in his head too. So just like you said before, so many times they'd say he was hurt or he took a shot and he would just come right back.
Yeah. Now, Muhammad Ali had the best recovery time from taking a shot where you could see it hurt him, but he came right back. It wasn't 10, 15 seconds later. It was maybe 2 seconds. It was an unbelievable recovery time. But Hagler didn't seem like he had to recover. It was a very different thing.
Yeah, no, even when you got to later in his career, as he was, obviously just was battle tested, more flat footed throwing shots, but he was even at that point in his career taking like the biggest shots he had taken and was always still coming forward. Never seemed in trouble and never nearly knocked out.
So if Hearns and John Mugabe couldn't phase him, the guy wasn't going to be phased. I mean, it doesn't get much better in terms of offensive firepower than those two guys.
Yeah, no, and especially, obviously, he went even a couple of years before that. I know Duran had moved up in weight class, but he had the 15 fight with Roberto Duran, and even though he didn't step on the gas and look really to stop Duran, I mean, he was outboxing him, and he was in control the whole fight of that fight as well.
Yeah, I thought he respected him a bit too much, but I mean, he won the fight indecidedly, so we'll move on, I guess. If you're Marvin Hagler, I think he would have preferred to knock him out. And Duran would go on to tell Tommy Hearns that Hagler had no punching power.
Yeah, well, Tommy definitely found out. Tough worry about that one.
Yeah, both hands. Like I was saying, the only thing I would say about Marvin Hagler I would change is maybe a little bit more speed. And that wasn't even really lacking back in his 20s. But, of course, most of the world didn't get to see him until he was in his 30s.
Yeah, and that's what the problem was, like you said. Is even a lot of his early fights aren't even on, like, film to watch nowadays. Like, they're just from back in the day, like you said, just from back then, they didn't even have him on TV or film or anything back then either, a lot of his early fights. I think it was his first 25 or 30 fights they said they might not have, or there's minimal.
That's sad.
Go of it at all, which is crazy.
Yeah, last time I saw Goody Petronelli, I was sitting with him watching Dana Rosenblatt against Vinny Pazienza.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And we had a gentleman's bet. We had to buy the next round. And I took Rosenblatt, and he took Vinny Pazienza, and he even named the round. He said he's going to knock out Rosenblatt in the 5th. And Rosenblatt was really winning the fight. And Pazienza knocked him out in the 5th. The guy knows his thing. He knows his stuff. There's no question.
Here too, definitely.
Yeah. So, and Robbie Sims, Marvin Hagler's half-brother, really, really good guy. He was always in Marvin's shadow, kind of like Billy Ripken, right? But he fought and beat Duran. Yeah,
no, so definitely, it's really cool to definitely, and I'm not sure too much about Robbie personally, but, he was always, I always did see that he was always, someone always definitely in Hagler's corner and someone who was always there to kind of count on. And Hagler always had a thing, obviously, and I heard you talk earlier about how he didn't sign autographs.